Hello! In this video we're going to go over R Markdown inside of RStudio Cloud. Let's get going! Alright, so the first thing I've done here is I've created just a simple new project workspace within RStudio Cloud. So if you've already got an RStudio Cloud account, then you're good to go, no problem. If not, you can sign up for one for free. They're pretty easy. Alright, so once we get started or get this new project going, I'm going to go ahead and get the actual files downloaded because it actually is going to take a little bit of time in order for us to do this. And then I'll kind of explain to those people that aren't fully familiar with R Markdown exactly what it is and why it's useful. So inside this project, I'm going to hit the File button and select New File, and then the third option down, R Markdown. It's going to think for a second, and then it should actually give me a pop-up window here that's going to say, yep, we need a whole bunch of different packages to download here. Do you want to install these packages now? Hit yes. And this is actually going to just start a whole process of downloading a bunch of things. And depending upon your internet speed, this may take a while. So just going ahead and kind of let things run. So while this is downloading, I'll kind of explain briefly what R Markdown is and why it's so useful and interesting. So R Markdown is this architecture where you can input R code inside of regular Markdown code and generate a document that will typeset and knit together and actually execute R code inside of the document itself. So then if you have like a printed result or a graph or something, it'll format that nice and neat inside of the actual document itself. So R can actually generate calculations. If you have updating data that's happening at the same time inside your document, then each time you knit this document, it can dynamically change too, which is really kind of interesting and neat. I do a lot of my own personal slides inside of for my coursework inside of R Markdown, and a lot of those uses a lot of publicly available data from like the FRED or the BEA, and so I'll have this data downloading in real time, parse through all of it, clean it up, and get it exactly to the format I need, run maybe some regressions or something, so that all of the output that's generated inside of my slides that are R Markdown documents is always freshly up to date, ready to go each time I teach a new class. So it's a really powerful architecture that you can do, and there's really kind of the sky is the limit in terms of the kind of applications that you might possibly want to do. This file or this video is kind of designed for my students to kind of introduce them to R Markdown, because for them this might be the first time that they've seen it, and so in that case this kind of might be helpful for them to do homework or project assignments and to be able to turn them in at the same time as actually writing fully integrated and working functioning code. Alright, so after that downloads a bunch of stuff, you're going to get a dialog box that pops up here, and the first thing it's going to say is, okay, give me title. So here I'm just going to type something like, I don't know, R Markdown test. This is actually going to be the title that will be formatted inside the document itself. This is not what you're calling the actual R Markdown file, though. It can be the same if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be, so just keep that in mind. And then for author, I'll just put my name. Oh, if I can spell my name correctly. And then you can, below that, you can select different output types, whether you want an HTML file so that it actually opens up inside of a web browser, a PDF output, or a Microsoft Word document. Now there's also some other categories over here, presentations if you want different type of slide outputs, Shiny if you want a Shiny app or a Shiny presentation, and then of course you have some other templates that you might possibly download. I'll go through each of these different other options here on this left-hand menu. I'll go over these in subsequent videos and kind of show some different functionalities and some of the different options. But you can really kind of get fancy and neat with some of these documents, and so it's really kind of cool. Initially here I'm going to choose HTML, but I would like to take a brief moment to talk about PDF and Microsoft Word documents. Microsoft Word, this is probably the least functioning of all of them. If there's any one of these that's not going to be quite as nice or play as nicely with this kind of architecture, it's going to be the Microsoft Word. That's not necessarily surprising. The kind of people that normally gravitate towards the usage of R as a platform, they are automatically kind of probably relatively more averse to actually using proprietary software like Microsoft Word, so that's not necessarily surprising. But some of the outputs, let's say you run a regression and you have want the results to be put into a nicely formatted table, some of that functionality is lost if it comes to a Microsoft Word, where it wouldn't be through a PDF or an HTML file. The PDF, it says here PDF output requires TeX. This is actually referring to LaTeX. The cool thing about using R Markdown within RStudio Cloud is that you actually do not need a LaTeX editor pre-installed on your machine. This is already in the cloud and it will do it for you, and that's really, really cool and helpful. I say use PDF only if you know baseline tech, or at least are familiar with LaTeX in some degree. Learning LaTeX sometimes has a little bit of a learning curve, so for my undergraduate students, I recommend maybe steer clear of the PDF output. For most of them, I'll say, okay, just give it to me in an HTML file, unless there's a specific reason to use PDF. So for here, we'll use HTML. We'll hit OK. And the really cool thing about the architecture of R Markdown is that it automatically gives you basically a minimal working example. So I'm going to break down what each of these sections of this document is, and then we're actually going to knit it and actually take a look at it. So the first few sections are lines of here, lines 1 through 6, that are kind of subdivided by these 3 dashes. This is what we refer to as the YAML header. So this is going to have some information here that automatically is going to be pre-populated or pre-generated based on a specific style sheet. You can see the title within quotes here, R Markdown test, is exactly what we typed out. And so this is basically communicating in Markdown language of this document, hey, make this look like the title and the parameters that we've already predefined to be the title. Basically the thickness of the font, how big it is, whether it's centered or off to the side, etc. On the author line, you'll see we've got the name that I typed in here, Patrick Scott, and then of course you have the actual date that shows up here, and this is the current date that I'm actually sitting down here to record this video. And then you see output, and you'll see HTML_document. If you wanted to make this a PDF document, well, you could just real quickly just do that, and that's all you would need to change, and this would generate into a PDF document. But for now, we'll leave it as an HTML. All right, the rest of this document, you'll see some kind of shaded regions here. We have these 3 accent marks inside some curly brackets, and it says R setup. These are basically R code chunks. So inside of these commands, inside line 8 basically is a series of subcommands, but it basically tells this document, hey, this is R code, treat it like R code, knit it, and actually execute this R code. So the only code that's really here that it's executing is actually line 9. It's calling the knitter package to set the ops chunk command, and basically it's setting that the this echo equals true is kind of like a global document setting to say, hey, I want any R code, I want you to format that and actually print that R code as well as print then and actually run and execute the what the command says. Below that on line 12, you'll see 2 hashtags. Now, unlike in a traditional R script file, hashtags in this case is defaulting to Markdown usage. So 2 hashtags is saying, I want to treat this like a subheader. So this is not going to be a comment. So this R Markdown here on line 12, that will actually get printed. Whereas if you had this specifically in an R script file, line 12 would have gotten ignored in a traditional script file for R. But in R Markdown, this will actually print. The hashtags denote the level of subheader that it is. So you can have 1 hashtag, which is going to be subheader 1, 2 hashtags, subheader 2, etc. I think it goes all the way down to 4 or 5, which will basically kind of reduce the header, if you will, in size and boldness. We have some text here. This text will get formatted, so you'll kind of see what general formatting of text looks like. You can make actual hot links or HTML links here, putting the link between the less than and the greater than sign. And then there's some other styling, if you will, of the text below. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go on ahead and knit this, and we'll kind of see what the output of this looks like. So right above here, you can see there's a knit button. If you click on it, it's immediately going to say, okay, I need you to save this file first. There's an autosave function here, so we're just going to say call it test. And then I'm going to hit save. and then it's immediately going to say, wait, I wanted to bring a pop-up and I don't like that. Okay, we're fine. That's a web browser setting. So you can give it a moment, it'll knit everything together, and then it'll generate the output of this. There we go. All right, so here you can kind of see real quickly how everything gets formatted based on the code. And I'm actually going to slide this over to the side and then scroll up on the existing document itself so that you can kind of compare side by side exactly what's going on. So you can see on line 2 we have a title, R Markdown test, and then we have the title kind of formatted up here at the top. You can see on line 3 we have author, and then the author name gets formatted over here to the side. Same thing with the date. So after that, you can see we have the subheader, R Markdown. This R chunk between lines 8 and 10, it set an option, but there was nothing to print. So it executed that code, and it ran it, but then of course there's nothing to actually show for it, so we just kind of keep on going and it gets formatted in the document. So sometimes we run our code and there's no output. We just generate certain objects and then we call those in other calculations, but other times there is. So we have our text that we saw starting from line 14 through line 16, and we can see how that gets formatted accordingly. And then we also see from lines 18 to 20, we see the R command summary of the dataset cars. We can see the code that actually gets printed here. This is based on the initial option on line 9 when we said set the echo of this to be equal to true, basically to always print our R code by default. And then we actually print the actual summary of the cars data set. There's a speed variable and a distance variable, and then we actually get to see some of the summary statistics for that. Likewise, we can print a plot of the data. Here we have a plot of the pressure data, which is a data set that resides within R as well. So this is actually kind of cool and neat. This actually opens up the possibility for doing assignments and other document classes right out of your existing R code. So in some of my classes we'll actually work in R Markdown explicitly, even for taking notes. For instance, I teach a research methods class, and in that class we go through specifically regression analysis examples, and we'll actually do so inside of R Markdown, where we'll actually type out the code in class, and then when the students leave, by the time they leave there, they actually have full functioning notes with existing code already ready to go. And so that's kind of neat and interesting. Now, this splash content, if you will, it gets generated each time you do an R Markdown document. So I'm usually, the first thing I do is I'll just select all of it and just get rid of it entirely. I'll keep the YAML header because that's the thing that I always am going to have, otherwise nothing's going to run on here. But from that point on, everything else beyond that I don't necessarily want or keep, so I'll frequently just delete it. So if you do that, and you'll frequently find yourself in your own document, okay, how do I insert new R code? Well, that's fine. There's an insert button here, and you can actually see there's multiple different types of code that you can insert inside of an R Markdown document. Now, these aren't necessarily going to run, but they'll at least get formatted, and with for some of these, they'll some of them will run, some of them won't. But you'll at least get proper syntax, highlighting, etc., etc. But if you select the R option at the very top, you'll see that you get that pre-formatted window already right there. You'll see the 3 accent marks, you'll see the curly bracket for R, and then an empty space, and then of course the 3 accent marks again. You can also type this out manually. You don't have to do this to specifically get an R code chunk within that. So you can hit the 3 accent mark. This is below the escape key. Don't use the single quote key. You can do the curly brackets for R, and then you can enter down and then add the 3 accent marks again. So you can manually do this. If you don't want to use the insert button, you can just type it out by hand manually, and that works perfectly well. So just to kind of give you an idea of what we can do here, I'm going to create just some sample data, and I'll create just a simple data frame. Here I'm going to define our X variable as the sequence from 1 to 100, and then I'll create a Y variable here that's just random data of equal length. with a wide variance. Great. So what I've done here is I've created just a simple data frame with two variables. The first is going to be what I called x, which is just a sequence of integers from 1 to 100. And then the y variable is just some normally generated data, 100 observations with a mean of 4,778 and a standard deviation of 902. Why? I don't know, because it just sounds like fun, so I just did it, so yay. All right, and so then I'm going to call within our library, I want ggplot2, and before I do that, actually, we need to actually install this package within this specific workspace, because I don't have that set up by default. So we're going to say I want to install ggplot2 and let that run while we're doing that. And then down below here, we will write ggplot, and we want to put our sample data that we just created here. And then we'll run a geom line. And we'll define our x and y accordingly. Now, sometimes when you run specific libraries, you'll get messages that will print with here. So I'm going to set an additional option here. If you just hit a comma after your R code, you'll actually get a whole bunch of lists that'll populate here for different options. I'm going to set message equal to false so that hopefully it won't print any messages when we actually knit our R code. All right, so now that we've got ggplot2 actually downloaded within this workspace, this should actually work really well. I don't need to hit save. I can knit. It'll automatically save it when I do so, or when I knit. And yeah, we can see that we've got our sample code, our sample data code that prints up top here, and then we have the actual code that prints the graph, and then of course we have our ggplot graph here right below that as well, exactly what we would expect. So this is just kind of a brief, rough tutorial for R Markdown. If you have any other questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. And yeah, in the future, I'll probably go through some other R Markdown features as well. Thank you very much for watching.